Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. Yes, I've got a very wide grin on my face because that Saudi prince, we told him he dissed Bitcoin, and now he had all his wealth confiscated, and he's sleeping on an Airbnb in some Ritz hotel in the middle of Riyadh. Stacey?
Yes, Max. Well, let's talk about the latest at the time that we're recording this. Prince Al-Walid bin Talal is under house arrest, under Ritz arrest, you might say. He's at the Ritz in Riyadh, sleeping on a blow-up mattress. And he's a major shareholder of Twitter, Citigroup, and Fox, Disney, all these sort of companies. But the interesting thing about this is it comes only days after he had dissed Bitcoin as fraud. And part of the reason why he said it's fraud is that governments don't control it. So he then goes on to provide a use case for why one would want Bitcoin. I'll read some of the headlines here. Saudi crackdown widens as more bank accounts said frozen. Apparently, there's about $33 billion at the time we're recording this, seized and held by MBS as the new crown prince. Some say is going to seize absolute control, that he has seized $33 billion worth of assets. Al-Walid bin Talal had about $17 billion in assets, so I don't know how much of those are frozen or allegedly frozen. AFP news agency at the time over the weekend when this the arrests and asset seizures happened, Saudis say bank accounts of those arrested in corruption crackdown to be frozen. So their bank accounts are frozen. Chaos seems to be happening. It's funny in a way, but on the other hand, it's not funny because it looks like there could be some sort of, World War III about to erupt in the Middle East.
This guy, Al-Walid, is a putz, okay? He said Bitcoin's no good because there's no central government, there's no central bank. And then a week later, the central bank and the central government rips out all of his net worth. If he had in Bitcoin, he wouldn't have that problem. He's like a poster child for why you should buy Bitcoin. Anyone who's thinking about, should I buy Bitcoin? Look at this poor idiot sleeping on a mattress in a Ritz hotel under house arrest because he didn't listen to me. Okay? Furthermore, he's overrated as a money manager, wealthy dude. He's just a Warren Buffett wannabe. He got bailed out in 2008, 2009, just like all those other crooks on Wall Street. He's got no acumen whatsoever. He just got a bunch of oil wealth. He buys strategic positions in big companies. Big frickin' deal. But he talks like an idiot, and now he's paying the price for dissing Satoshi.
Well, beyond that, actually, I think it's quite interesting because we've been here in Washington, D.C., and we don't usually watch the nightly news, but we have because we've been in a hotel and turned it on. And it's not even on the news here. None of this is on the news, which seems remarkable. But the fact that like dozens of these princes and royal family members are under house arrest, under Ritz arrest. At least two princes have been killed in bizarre, one a helicopter crash, the other in some sort of shootout with the police, they say. I mean, all of this is allegedly, but it's so bizarre that it's not being covered on the nightly news, even though it's allegedly such a close ally of America and quite important to not only the oil markets, but the entire Middle East. Then we have the situation where the likes of The Guardian in the UK are bizarrely pushing all these weird lines that this is somehow the great reformist. The new crown prince is arresting all these people and throwing people out of helicopters and having gunfights with other princes because of some sort of anti-corruption drive. It seems really bizarre to witness the absolute shutdown in the media of covering this. I don't know why, but they are choosing not to cover it.
Well, but if you're a Saudi prince and you buy the top 7 floors of the Dorchester every year for you and your entourage of 50 or 60 or so, then you're a reformist. When you're out there, killing folks and doing a massive power grab and mucking about in the world markets. If, however, you're just an emerging economy that's trying to make good on trade deals and grow from $200 billion to $1.5 trillion to $5 trillion, you're out there in Eurasia, good relations with Europe, good relations with China, good relations with Iran, you have Cyrillic in your alphabet, and you've got a good hockey-playing leader, then somehow you're a bad guy. because you're not buying 7 floors of the Dorchester on a weekend for your whole entourage of 50, flying in with a helicopter and spending Maserati-type money. You know, it's a total duplicitous nightmare, and this Aliwad dude is an overrated putz.
Okay, well, let's go back to him, because this is when I was looking at some of the coverage of Prince Al-Walid bin Talal. So he's one of the grandsons, the many dozens and dozens of grandsons. There's like 5,000 princes. He's a grandson of the founder.
They got no condoms over there? What's wrong with these people?
The founder of Saudi Arabia. So here's a headline I read over the weekend, and it comes to this paragraph, which is so shocking, and yet the fact is shocking in that what is an acceptable authoritarian? What is an acceptable dictator? What is an acceptable sort of way to rule a country to some segments of the press here, and yet not to others? So listen to this paragraph about who this guy is. Who is Al-Walid bin Talal, the absurdly rich prince at the center of the Saudi corruption purge? As I said, he was born in 1955, grandson of the first king of Saudi Arabia. His holdings in Twitter, Lyft, Euro Disney, and 20th Century Fox, luxury hotels across the world, a tower under construction in Saudi Arabia that will soon be the world's tallest building, or his opulent palace, where Business Insider once reported the prince kept a, quote, group of dancing, laughing, joking dwarfs in his entourage, occasionally tossing them around as sport-like human shot puts. I was like, what? Like, he goes on all the media here and is hailed as some like Warren Buffett. He's just a fiddle player, sort of like cute guy from Saudi Arabia. And he's a Warren Buffett of Saudi Arabia. And apparently they can also say he's like has this, he's
a dwarf.
Yeah.
He's a dwarf.
Which is not politically correct.
Well, you know, it goes back to the financial crisis of 2009. Remember, people were searching for ways to grow their economy, and it was in Florida that they made legal again dwarf tossing. It had been illegal.
Yes.
That's probably where he got the idea.
Yes, but I don't want to harp too much on this point. The point is that, you know, the duplicity of the sort of principles applied to certain countries, if it depends on who is flowing the cash to you. Here, Saudi Arabia, you know, they've suffered dearly under the price of oil collapsing. They have a very hungry population because they don't get to, you know, they have 7,000 princes to support, tens of millions of ordinary citizens to support as well. They did have to borrow something like $100 billion last year on the international bond markets.
Yeah.
The $33 billion could pay off a third of it at least. Also on this article about Prince Al-Walid, they also do say, because here's a guy who took on President Trump. A lot of the conspiracy theorists from like the likes of MSNBC and New York Times here in the United States, what they're saying is that somehow Donald Trump had something to do with the arrest of Prince Al-Walid bin Talal because he had insulted the president on Twitter. And here they say in the article, talking to locals in Saudi Arabia, Al-Walid is the Donald Trump of Saudi Arabia, an expert on the Saudi royal house told Forbes last year. He may be a symbol of success for some Saudis, but many others view him as being way too gaudy. So,
well, he's a vulgarian, like the Trump-esque milieu. But you know, Trump is a kind of a hard-scrabble guy from Queens who took on the establishment in Manhattan, and he had to fight his way up. Sometimes getting penalized 2 or 3 shots on the back nine at Westchester Country Club to make his billions. This guy was born with a silver camel in his mouth, and he grew up to be even more outrageously overly priced as part of the petrodollar arrangement from 1971, where America decided to anoint these Saudi people with hundreds of trillions of dollars worth of money in exchange for the oil. That was the quid pro quo that is now the architecture of the global economy, and gave us, as a corollary to this, Wahhabism. That was the trade-off. They'll say, we'll do the dollar, oil, petrodollar, but you've got to accept Wahhabism. And then when things started to fray, they sent a little hello note, a little love note on 9/11, saying, remember us, we're your partners. And then they've been keeping America under their boot, and now Trump comes in and says, you know what, let's redo things a little bit here. And he said he green-lit this coup in Saudi Arabia, essentially,
Actually,
and now the whole thing's being re-architected, as it should be.
Yeah, because he did, Donald Trump did tweet right before this all happened that he would like the Saudi Aramco IPO to be on the New York Stock Exchange.
They touched the orb. You saw the photo. They touched the orb. That was the green light to let the coup go.
Well, so he was pitching for business. It's all business at the end of the day, because remember, the United Kingdom was also selling vast quantities of sort of fighter jets and weapons to Saudi Arabia that they were dropping on Yemen and hoping in exchange that they would get the IPO, the business for Saudi Aramco. And now, apparently, the United States is throwing their hat in the ring. So it's all business at the end of the day. But it's interesting to watch, again, the fact that the mainstream media here doesn't seem to know how to cover it yet. So they're just not covering it.
No, they don't know how to cover it yet because it distorts their parallax view of the world that centers around the intractable evilness of Russia. Look, there is a third rail in the region that if anyone puts their foot onto that third rail, they're going to be fried quicker than you can say, Harvey Weinstein in a bathrobe. And that would be Iran. If anyone decides to actually pick a fight with Iran, they're prepared to meet thy maker. They've been waiting for war for 20 years. They've got an incredible ability to take on these jokers in the Middle East. And that would be the absolute suicide mission if the Shia and the Sunnis decide, hey, let's go at it toe to toe. Okay. If Trump brings that on, then he was successful in bringing on World War III.
By the way, Saudi Arabia has way more advanced military. So it's they have all the best weapons from the United Kingdom and the United States.
Yeah. Who are Iran's allies?
However, it doesn't. I'm not picking a side or anything like that. That's like beyond it. But the fact is that the media has been pushing for a war. They want a war, and maybe they're going to get the war that they don't want, because we've been still, we're still in Afghanistan. We can't even control Afghanistan, and all they had were sticks and stones. They don't have any weapons, and we still can't control that country. We still can't control Iraq. We still like Libya is a disaster zone. So why we went on another disaster zone, I don't know, but that seems to be what is happening, and it looks like now Saudi Arabia, this new crown prince, is now the largest shareholder of Twitter. But it'll be good for the oil market.
Exactly.
If you're long oil.
Oil's already, telegraphing this huge move. Well, I guess oil crisis, those are always a blast. Well, stay tuned for the second half. A whole lot more. Alrighty, howdy. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. Time to continue our discussion with Dr. Michael Hudson, author, all-around nice guy. Would you consider yourself a New Yorker, Dr. Michael Hudson?
Absolutely not. I've never felt comfortable in New York. I was born in Minneapolis, and when my father got out of jail, we moved to Chicago, and I grew up there.
Whoa. When your father got out of jail, what?
He was one of the Minneapolis 17 sent up the day before Pearl Harbor for advocating the advocacy of the overthrow of the government by force and violence, which meant that he was organizing the Teamsters Union. And the Roosevelt administration made a deal with Dan Tobin to turn the Teamsters Union over to the mob. And apparently there was a deal with the Russians that if the government would throw the Minneapolis Trotskyists in jail, and Minneapolis was the only city in the world where being a Trotskyist was a career advancement opportunity, that they promised not to have strikes during World War II. So the Stalinists were calling for the death penalty against the Smith Act that later was used against them after World War II. So at any rate, my father was one of the Minneapolis 17, and then we moved to Chicago. I loved Chicago. I still think of that as my basic city. And when I think of which direction I'm in, I still act as if the Hudson River is Lake Michigan, and except that that's on the west instead of the east, so I'm always turned around.
Okay, now we were just in Minneapolis, and I did a little reading up on this city. So it is on the top of the river there, the Mississippi River. It's at the very top, and it made its bones on milling flour. And they created bleached flour, which then they ran into trouble with the bleached flour. It was determined scientifically that bleached flour was no good for you, and the people came in with the full, the flour with the full,
not the whole grain.
The whole grain flour,
right.
And so So what was the labor conditions like at that time? Because obviously that story plays into it, right? I mean,
Minneapolis was a center of labor history in the 1930s.
Okay.
You had a general strike there in 1934, 1936. There's a book about that, Charles Rumford Walker's American City, that describes it. You had the whole general strike, and that became, as I said, the only Trotskyist city in the world.
so this is in the Depression, essentially.
Yes.
And you had the Wall Street blow up in the 29 crash, and you quickly entered into the Depression. And Trotskyists and communists and other forms of governments and economics other than capitalism were in the ascent, because it was considered the Wall Street was a collapse of the capitalist ideal. So you had these competing schools suddenly in America, and it gave rise to ardent anti-communists. We saw McCarthy in the 50s. That's really a holdover from that period, correct? And we saw, Reagan was also out of that school of fighting the communists. He built a huge political career on it. But from there is where you have then this labor. Was there much of organized labor in America before then?
Of course, from the late 19th century on. Eugene Debs, the socialists, you had, but the center of labor organization was in the Midwest, because that's where the manufacturing was. It happened that in Minneapolis, because it's not very populated, the truckers were the big industry there. There was a lot of violence. You had Floyd B. Olson, who was the governor, who said he hoped the capitalist system goes right to hell, and so he was reelected as governor. It was all destroyed when the right wing came in, led by Hubert Humphrey on the far right.
Right. That's exactly right. And that was his path to the presidency, I guess, right?
To show that he was a good double-crosser. He was sort of an early Obama type, speak left and then slam down with them very hard on the right.
Right. So this is a fascinating piece of American history. So Minneapolis is an undertold story, I would say. People are familiar with Chicago and what happened in the 30s, obviously organized crime. People know the history of organized labor in New York and the longshoremen. And of course, organized labor then became corrupt, didn't it? It was infiltrated by the mafia, essentially.
That was largely Roosevelt's doing, and it was done because of his fight against the Teamsters in Minneapolis.
Right.
He wanted the only alternative to having the socialists organize the labor unions was to have the mafia organize the labor unions by saying, if you're the head of the labor unions, you get to say who's hired, you get the kickbacks, you get everything that Bob Fitch wrote about in his study of the labor movement. So it's very much like in Japan, when America backed the Yakuza against the socialists. Japan had a very strong socialist movement. MacArthur came in, backed all of the most right-wing Japanese, militarist Japanese, and the gangs, the Yakuza gangs, to fight against socialists. And that's why you have Japan in the sorry state that it's in today when it comes to industrial honesty and the steel mills, So it's an interesting period. It's a fulcrum, the 30s, and seemingly in Minneapolis. I mean, okay, there's organized labor before, but then it became a threat. In a big way, because the capital system was collapsing. I mean, I guess before then it was more of an adjunct to the overall economy where, okay, we're going to organize labor. They invented the weekend, for example, organized labor. Without the organized labor, we would have no weekend. Right. And we have no Hollywood. We have no entertainment industry. We have no theme parks. We have no vacations. It's a huge part of the economy of America was invented in effect by labor. And then when the 30s post crash, it really became more politicized in that sense. So did the labor organizers at that point, were they always referring back to a Leninist Marxist reference? No, not at any point. Remember, Minneapolis is very largely Scandinavian. So you had a lot of Scandinavians there. In New York, you'd have basically Central Europeans and Jews organizing the garment trades and the labor unions. But in Minneapolis, you had a completely different ethnicity with a different national background, and they had a kind of Scandinavian sense of fair play. My father father said that, who graduated from the University of Minnesota with an MBA, he said it was the Rover Boys stories that gave him a sense of fair play. And
the Rover Boy being
the American boy stories of the early 1900s.
Horatio Alger?
Yeah, that kind of thing.
Or does that come later?
All that same idea of everybody being fair and kind of how little kids would play with each other.
Norman Rockwell depiction of America.
Well, except he was a Stalinist. So
Rockwell?
Yeah.
Was a Stalinist?
Yes.
What?
Yes. You didn't know that he was one of their funders? That's the irony.
I'm
of the
learning
whole thing.
things here today that are shocking. What? So anyway, to get back to the narrative here. So the 30s. So, and what was there an individual person where labor in America suddenly did start to overtly reference Marxist Leninist doctrine?
Not really,
Except your dad.
No, when I was, even my father, when I was a little kid, my father would take me over to the houses of a lot of leaders, including people who were on the Central Committee of the Comintern when Lenin was in power. And I was maybe 8 or 9 years old, and I'd always look at the library, and they always had Marx's Capital in the library. And I'd always go and look at, open it up, and nobody had ever read a single, they'd never been opened before, especially volumes 2 and 3 had never been opened. Volume 1 maybe, but not volumes 2 and 3. So the fact is they had them on the shelves, but they didn't read it.
So your career took you through Wall Street. You were a credit analyst for Chase Manhattan Bank.
Well, just about
right?
Who else was going to be an economist on Wall Street except a Marxist?
Well, tell me more. Why would you say such a thing?
Well, we know that it's all about exploitation. And if you go to a business school and you think everything's fair, and you don't understand that it's about exploitation and crooks and, how the system works. The Marxists being outsiders, we could look at the system. And of course, we were the forward planners and the futurists because we were looking at how society would change. And the business schools would tell people there's not going to be any change. Everything's going to go just the way it is. That's what we call equilibrium. And we Marxists were always looking at disequilibrium. So we could, of course, forecast all of
But you were analyzing the credit in terms of how effectively it could be extractive.
I was saying how much could be extracted and at what point will the break come, and that's certainly all Volume 3 of Capital. That credit, as Marx pointed out, interest-bearing debt grows exponentially, but the economy only grows on an S-curve and tapers off. So every economy creates debt faster than the ability to pay, and that's where the break is.
So Marx is the quintessential critic of capitalism.
Yes,
is that a fair statement?
That's why he called his book Capital.
Right. So as a philosophy, it's not really presenting a political construct, although many have chosen to use it as such.
He looked at the laws of motion. So it's not a construct as a single building. It's the law of motion. It's a river.
So
it's something that's flowing.
Where have communist countries gone wrong? Because, people have tried to adopt systems that were the antithesis of capitalism or different than capitalism. So far, we haven't seen many succeed. What's going wrong there?
Well, right after Lenin died, Stalin killed everybody who'd read Marx.
Oh, okay. So that would put the kibosh on things.
Since the 1920s, Russia has knew nothing about Marxism, and it was the first
it's been tried elsewhere. All over the world it's been tried. It's been tried in other countries, other hemispheres, other places.
Marxism, in a way? I don't really think so. I mean, certainly
socialism?
Socialism is a step towards it, and everybody.
What are they getting wrong, though? In other words, my question is, what would, if you were starting a country today, or convert America to a different system? Because obviously the system now is extractive, it's compounding the debt ad infinitum, and it's causing huge wealth and income gaps, and it's not working in many different ways. And so, if you were to come back and you're a Marxist scholar, effectively, what would be a couple of the points that would build, a sustainable economy?
That what is stifling the economy today is finance, and it's the growth of debt, and it's the inability of debt to pay that is leading to a huge transfer of property.
Which would lead to, let's say, the MTM theory? Modern
monetary
theory.
Yes.
Which is that the solution in your book?
Yes, but I go beyond most of the MMTers because I divide the private sector into the FIRE sector, the finance, insurance, and real estate, as opposed to the industrial.
So we got about a minute.
economy.
So just describe MMT. And that's a huge out of the school in Kansas City.
Yes.
Is you find the MMT people like yourself. Bill Black, I think, is there.
Yeah, Marshall Auerbach.
Marshall Auerbach, he's in that too.
He's at the Bard.
Who's that lovely
College,
woman
Levy
who's always talking about it?
Stephanie Kelton.
Stephanie Kelton, she's in this. So in 30 seconds, kind of break it down for us what it is.
That banks or the government create money simply electronically. It's not a thing. Money is debt. And the way that you create money into the economy is create debt by one party to another. If the government spends money into the economy, it spends it directly on infrastructure, on hiring goods and service, hiring labor to produce something
so
real.
The government creates money, not like a central bank that lends it to the government.
It could. No,
doesn't make any difference.
The Treasury,
no interest bearing.
Essentially, the Treasury used to be the central bank. The Federal Reserve broke the Treasury off to put money creation in the hands of Wall Street.
So get rid of that. Go back to
put the Treasury in control once again.
Right.
The Treasury would issue money. But if you leave money creation to the banks, endogenous money, as Steve Keen, who you often have said, the banks lend money only, they don't lend money to spend on goods and services. They lend money for corporate takeovers, to inflate real estate prices. So government money creation is different purpose from private bank money creation.
Okay, we got to leave it there. Dr. Michael Hudson, thank you. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Huber. I'd like to thank our guest, Dr. Michael Hudson. If you want to reach us on Twitter, it's Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.